The concrete wall wasn't there yesterday. Now it stood tall and smug, cutting off the only road to our land, with a bold sign that read, "Private HOA property. No access." As I stared at it in stunned silence, something inside me snapped, not in panic, but in cold, calculated defiance. I was still gripping the steering wheel when I saw it, three fresh concrete barricades stretching across the only road to our land. No signs, no warnings, just a solid gray wall where there should have been access. My first thought wasn't panic. It was something colder, deeper. They'd actually done it. After months of whispering threats, cryptic violation notices, and random delays, the HOA had crossed the final line. And they thought I wouldn't be ready. But I was. Because long before I laid the first brick of our dream house, I'd laid a foundation they never saw coming. 14 months earlier, I sat across the kitchen table from my father, Howard Green, as he slowly turned page after page of the property documents, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. "There's something off here," he muttered, tapping the easement language. "This road," he pointed at the thin private line skirting the edge of the Birchwood summit. "Estates isn't public. It's owned by the HOA." He leaned back. "That's why the land's so cheap. Most buyers would have walked away. But I wasn't most buyers. My wife Natalie and I had spent nearly a decade in the Bay Area, socking away everything we could while sharing a one-bedroom apartment above a noisy bakery. She freelanced as a designer, and I was a senior developer for a renewable energy firm. We didn't need much, just space, silence, and sky. When we found that 3-acre lot nestled into the redwoods behind Birchwood Summit, it felt like a miracle. And miracles always come with fine print. Howard Ever, the attorney, didn't flinch. "We'll ironclad it," he said. "We spent 3 weekends crafting the purchase agreement. In addition to a permanent easement across the private road, he added a few legal sleeper clauses, backups most folks would overlook. One was a secondary easement through Lot 13B, which cut directly through the HOA's central corridor. The other, an obscure right tied to Lot 305A, the community's ornamental lake. When I asked why we needed that, he just smiled and said details matter when people get greedy. We closed the deal, and Natalie burst into tears the first time we walked the land. It was quiet, wild, sacred. A gentle slope down to a seasonal creek with deer paths threading between the oaks. We stayed until dusk that day, sketching ideas on a notepad, wide windows, an open kitchen, a greenhouse wall for herbs. Our dream had roots now, but not everyone shared our excitement. At our first HOA meeting, President Lorna Prescott introduced herself with a handshake that felt like a warning. Late 50s, immaculate in a tailored blue blazer, she surveyed me the way someone might examine a potential termite infestation. "So you're the new owners of Parcel 314, she said, pronouncing the number like a slur. I nodded, smiling. "Looking forward to building soon." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see," she replied coolly. We hadn't even broken ground before the letters began. The first cited excessive wild growth. The second warned of aesthetic inconsistencies with community landscaping standards. The kicker: the land was untouched, still nothing but trees and brush. Natalie called it what it was, a warning shot. Then came the permit issues. Our elevation plans were incomplete, our soil tests insufficient, and our environmental assessment too vague. Each rejection came from the same city official, Bradley Kearns, a planning supervisor with exactly zero interest in helping us. The odd part, our architect had built 6 homes in the same county without a single hiccup. "Something's wrong," Natalie whispered one night, staring at her laptop. She was right. She pulled records. Bradley played golf with Mark Hanley, the HOA's vice president, every other Saturday. There were Facebook photos, arms slung over shoulders, grins over cocktails. I sent everything to Howard. "Looks like the planning office needs some sunlight," he said. "Let's bypass the boys' club." Meanwhile, we kept getting slapped with violations. At one point, we were fined $150 per day for a wooden surveyor stake. When I called the HOA office, the receptionist transferred me 4 times before saying, "That's a Lorna-level issue." No one knew what rule we'd broken, only that we were breaking something. Enter Reverend Dale Thompson, our quiet neighbor, 2 lots over. I found him one morning walking his spaniel along the edge of our property. "Heard you're building something honest," he said. I nodded. "Trying to." He glanced at the stake with a grin. "Watch Lorna. She plays chess while others are still reading the rule book." Then he lowered his voice. "Don't trust Mark either, but keep an eye on Rebecca Lynn. She's new, quiet, but she's not like the others. Sure enough, at the next board meeting, when I gently brought up the constant violations and asked for clarification, Lorna dismissed me with a wave. If you have concerns, she said into her mic, you can submit them through proper channels. When Rebecca quietly offered to review the fine structure, Lorna cut her off. We're not here to rewrite the rules. Later that night, I sat on the floor with Howard and Natalie, going through every document again. They're trying to bleed us dry, Natalie said. I nodded. But they're not reading the contract. Howard smiled. That's where they'll lose. With the help of a permit expediter, an old friend of Howard's, we finally got our building permit approved. I called Natalie from the planning office, practically shouting, we did it. We toasted with cheap sparkling cider on the hood of the car that night. It felt like the war was over. It wasn't. 1 week later, a bright orange sign appeared at the end of the private road. Maintenance in progress, no access. Trucks from our contractor arrived only to be turned away. I called the HOA office. We don't have any specifics on the scope or duration, the assistant told me nervously. Mrs. Prescott is in a meeting. The meeting, it turned out, never ended. After 3 days of silence, I drove to the site and found no workers, no equipment, just barricades. I took photos. Natalie launched the drone. We documented everything. On day 5, we got the answer. The barricades had been replaced with concrete, not the kind used in temporary fixes. This was permanent rebar reinforced, freshly sealed. In front of it was a sign that read, Private HOA property, no through access. Violators will be prosecuted. I stared at that wall for a long time. My hands trembled not with fear, but with fury. This wasn't bureaucracy. This was a declaration of war. I called Howard. It's time, I said. We're activating Appendix 8. There was a pause, then a smile in his voice. Good. They just triggered their own downfall. That night, as I drafted the formal notice, Natalie stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder. They think they won. I looked at her. They've mistaken silence for surrender. But Birchwood Summit was about to learn you never block a man's road when he knows the law better than you do, and built his dream on bedrock they never saw coming. The morning after they poured the wall, I didn't sleep. Natalie brewed coffee at 5 a.m., but neither of us touched it. I stared out the window as sunlight crept across the countertops, the silence between us heavier than anything the HOA could stack in concrete. Then I stood, walked to the file cabinet in the hallway, and pulled out the folder with the faded red tab, Appendix 8. My father had labeled it himself contingencies. At the time, it felt like overkill. Now it felt like a sword pulled from stone. By 9:30, I'd sent the notice. The language was clear, binding, and undeniable. In the event that primary access via HOA-managed private road is obstructed or denied for more than 72 hours, the secondary easement through parcel lot 13B may be activated without additional consent or compensation. And parcel 13B, it sliced straight through Birchwood Summit like a scalpel, cutting across 3 manicured lawns, past the tennis court, and out to our land. One of those lawns belonged to Mark Hanley, another to Lorna Prescott. I had Howard read the letter before sending. You sure you're ready for this? He asked. You're not just poking the bear anymore, Caleb. You're moving into its cave. I didn't blink. I'm done waiting for permission to use land I own. The response came faster than I expected. That evening, we received a formal HOA email marked Urgent Community Meeting. Board attendance required. Lorna knew exactly what was coming, and she wasn't going to let us do it quietly. The next day, the Birchwood Community Center buzzed with whispers. More than 80 residents packed the hall, some curious, some nervous others, wearing the stone faces of long-term complicity. Lorna opened the meeting with her usual saccharine poise. We've received notice from the Harringtons regarding an unusual clause in their purchase agreement. Her voice was calm, but her knuckles were white around the microphone. We're here to clarify what is and isn't enforceable within our community. I stood slowly, folder in hand. Actually, I began, we're here to remind the board what they already signed. The room went still. I read aloud the clause, then handed copies to each board member. Then I stepped aside as Howard approached the microphone. Calm, deliberate, and terrifying in his precision, my father proceeded to walk the room through the document they'd all either signed or authorized. This isn't a loophole, he said. This is contract law. Binding. enforceable, and entirely your doing. Then in a moment that shifted the entire tone of the meeting, Rebecca Lynn, silent until now, stood up from the far end of the table. I've reviewed the documents, she said clearly. The Harringtons have legal grounds. We failed to read the appendices. That's our mistake, not theirs. You could almost hear Lorna's mask cracking. Your loyalty is to this board, Rebecca, she hissed across the room. Not to outsiders. That one word, outsiders, ignited a ripple. Residents who had been quiet started murmuring. Reverend Dale, seated near the front, raised an eyebrow. He later told me it was the moment he realized how deep Lorna's control ran. Then came the bribe. After the meeting adjourned, Lorna cornered me outside near the parking lot. Caleb, she said smoothly, you're a practical man. Let's not let this become something messy. She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a preliminary contract offering me $500,000 above market value for the land, so long as we agreed to walk away and let the HOA develop the lot into a clubhouse. You'll be rich. No more stress. Just sign and let us take it from here. I didn't even pause. We're not here to profit off the land, I said. We're here to live on it. Her lips thinned into a cruel smile. Then I hope you enjoy the long war. But the war was already turning, because Natalie had quietly been building a coalition. She and Dale began reaching out to neighbors. Quiet conversations over fences, dog walks, and community bulletin boards. Residents shared stories of Lorna's intimidation fines over lawn gnomes, threats of lien filings for paint colors, anonymous complaints that always seemed to follow disagreements. Natalie collected every story, every document. And then the sabotage happened. It was a Tuesday when I got the call. Our construction crew had returned to the site to find the electrical system fried and the excavator's hydraulic lines slashed. Someone had broken into the temporary site office and dumped motor oil across every blueprint and permit copy. We reviewed the security camera footage that night. 2 men, hooded, working fast. One of them had a limp. The truck they left in had a partial license plate. Within 48 hours, the sheriff's office confirmed what we suspected: the truck was registered to a subcontractor of Apex Development, a company Lorna had worked with during her own real estate career. The detective promised to investigate, and I made sure the entire community heard about it. At the next HOA newsletter, one of the few they couldn't block, we published a timeline of events: permit delays, illegal access blockades, property sabotage, misuse of HOA funds. Natalie, brilliant as always, included screenshots of Lorna and Mark's dinner receipts charged to HOA accounts, steakhouses, spa retreats, and a $700 team-building weekend at a Napa winery. It lit a fire. Then, just as it seemed they might surrender, the board made one last move. Dale came to my door late one evening. You need to see this. He handed me a blurry phone photo, minutes from a private board meeting. The document was titled Proposal for Reclassification of Parcel 314 and Surrounding Properties as Protected Green Zone. If passed, it would prevent all residential development citing environmental preservation goals. And it already had a preliminary endorsement from the city's environmental liaison, a man named Victor Lennox, another named Natalie, traced back to golf outings with Mark Hanley. They had removed the wall, but now they wanted to bury us under red tape. I remember the moment clearly. Sitting in the living room, that green zone proposal on my lap, my father sipping tea like it was just another Tuesday. They think they're clever, he said, but we're still playing the same game. He tapped Appendix 8 with a pen. They trigger zoning restrictions, we trigger control of the lake. The room fell silent. Natalie looked up. Are you serious? Howard nodded. They never understood what they signed. They never read that clause. Lot 305A isn't just ornamental, it's the anchor of Birchwood Summit. Half the property value in this place hinges on proximity to that water. I leaned back, the stress washing off me like fog off the creek. They wanted to test us, I said. Now they're going to find out we're not the ones bluffing. And so the real endgame began. We drafted the next notice, scheduled the full HOA assembly, and printed every page of evidence, because the board had spent years ruling through fear and arrogance. But they never expected the quiet man at the edge of town with a software job and a lawyer dad to bring a storm. They had tried to bury us, but we came armed with facts, signatures, photos, and the weight of their own corruption. And next time we stood in front of them, it wouldn't be to ask for permission. It would be to take back everything they stole. The night before the HOA assembly, I sat at the dining table with Howard and Natalie, surrounded by documents, Printouts and maps, our living room lit only by the glow of task lamps and a flickering candle. It was quiet, but no one felt calm. We'd been through ambushes, sabotage, backroom deals, and public humiliation, but tomorrow wouldn't be another battle. It would be the reckoning. I leaned over Appendix 8, tracing my finger across the final clause, the one even I had nearly forgotten. In the event of any future zoning restrictions imposed after the closing date, the buyer shall assume full access and management rights to Lot 305A, the lake, the HOA's prized jewel, the crown centerpiece of Birchwood Summit, the reason most residents paid top dollar to live here. We all knew what this meant. They try to freeze us out, Howard said, setting down his cup of chamomile tea, but they signed away the thermostat a year ago, and they're about to feel it. We arrived at the community center the next evening to find the room already buzzing, more than 120 residents packed shoulder to shoulder, some standing near the exits, others clustered in the back hall waiting. People didn't usually show up for these meetings, but tonight wasn't usual. Lorna sat at the head of the board table like a dethroned queen, pretending the crown still fit. Mark sat beside her, checking his watch, not making eye contact with anyone. Rebecca Lynn was on the far end, calm but alert, a stack of manila folders in front of her. Dale gave me a nod from the front row. "Let's finish this," Natalie whispered. The board tried to open the meeting with an agenda, but I walked up to the mic and gently set down a USB drive. The projector behind them flickered to life. "Before we begin," I said, "the community deserves the full picture." And then I laid it out. Everything, in chronological order. Permit blocks, fabricated violations, the falsified maintenance project, the concrete barrier, the vandalism, the rezoning attempt. Then came the photographs of Lorna dining with city officials at steakhouses on the HOA card of Mark, hosting planning lunches at golf resorts, all billed to the community fund. Then came the footage, grainy night vision video of the 2 subcontractors hired to sabotage our construction site, along with license plate matches and contractor logs that led directly back to Apex Development. Natalie played an audio recording of Lorna taken from a call 2 months earlier, laughing with someone about making life so difficult for the Harringtons that they'll pack up and sell for half. The room went deathly quiet. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop. And then finally I pulled up the final document, Appendix 8, the clause tied to Lot 305A. This community lake I began was originally part of the developer's private holdings leased to the HOA under a conditional use agreement. When we bought our property, that agreement was bundled into our deed as part of contingency planning, contingency that was triggered when this board voted to rezone our land and deny us access. I turned to the room, which means by the agreement you all signed that the lake is no longer under HOA management. Howard stood flipping to the section with a practiced rhythm. Page 12, subsection 8C. In the event of interference with reasonable land development by board or municipal zoning influence, Lot 305A reverts to the named buyer for unrestricted control pending verification of interference. And I believe he added, looking squarely at Lorna, "We've all just seen that verification." Gasps swept the room. One man in the back stood up. "You mean they gave away our lake?" Another woman near the front shouted, "That's why property values have held here." That lake, Lorna finally spoke, rising from her chair. Her voice cracked. "This is absurd." That clause was buried. No one reads appendices like that. Howard raised an eyebrow. Then maybe no one should be signing multi-million-dollar contracts without reading them. Mark tried to chime in, but Rebecca stood. "I reviewed everything myself. And yes, they're right. It's all valid. Every line, every clause. This board," she added, her voice trembling slightly but steady, "has failed this community. We've allowed personal ambition to override fair governance. And it ends tonight." The crowd erupted. Dozens of voices called out, some in fury, some in agreement, many demanding immediate resignation. A retired judge from the cul-de-sac stood and addressed the board directly. "What you've done isn't just unethical, it's actionable. If any homeowner had done this, they'd be facing fines or worse. You abused your position." Several residents walked up and handed in written petitions for a board recall. Someone suggested Rebecca step in as interim president. The vote passed by a landslide. Lorna gathered her bag trembling and walked out without another word. Mark followed, red-faced and silent. After the official meeting ended, Howard and I met privately with Rebecca, Dale, and 3 newly nominated board members. We outlined our settlement proposal in full. The HOA would formally drop the conservation rezoning attempt, remove any record of violations from our file, compensate us for documented damage to our construction site and delays, and should they meet all conditions, we would return management of the lake to the community under a new lease with a plaque placed at the entrance that simply read, "Protected and preserved by the Harrington family." No drama, no threats. Just a reminder of what happens when a community forgets who it's supposed to serve. 2 weeks later, Lorna's house hit the market. Natalie and I watched from the front porch as a moving truck rolled up to her door. No neighbors came out. No one waved. She left Birchwood Summit in silence. Mark was gone a week after that. Rebecca was sworn in as interim HOA president and began immediate reforms, transparency rules, financial audits, and public board minutes. The mood in Birchwood shifted almost overnight. The once quiet neighbors started waving hello. Community gardens popped up. Front lawns hosted impromptu gatherings instead of silent judgment. 3 months later, we moved into our home. It wasn't grand by Birchwood standards, 800 square feet with large glass walls that opened to the woods. Natalie's studio took up the entire west side, bathed in morning light. My office overlooked the creek where we first stood the day we fell in love with the land. Dale brought by a housewarming basket with fresh jam and a handwritten card. "You didn't just build a house, you restored a neighborhood." That evening, we hosted a small celebration. Rebecca gave a short toast. Just as she said, simply isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like people doing the right thing when no one else would. Howard stood beside me, glass raised. "This community almost lost its soul," he said. "But it took a quiet family, a forgotten contract, and one badly buried clause to remind us details matter." As twilight settled, Natalie and I sat on the back deck watching the wind ripple across the lake. A new wooden sign glowed softly near the shoreline, just beneath the lantern light, "Protected and preserved by the Harrington family." I took a deep breath and felt for the first time in months completely still. "You think we did the right thing?" I asked her. Natalie leaned her head on my shoulder. "I think we gave them back more than a lake." And she was right, because fighting for our land had never just been about the dirt or the house or even the permit. It had been about the principle. And in defending what was ours, we'd helped an entire neighborhood remember what it meant to belong. We didn't make this story up. Real people really are this bold. And in this case, justice wasn't just served. It was signed, sealed, and posted for everyone to see. Sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting your property. It's about protecting your dignity, your values, and your right to live freely without fear or manipulation. Caleb and Natalie Harrington's journey reminds us that not every battle is fought with shouting or rage. Some of the most powerful victories are earned with patience, preparation, and the quiet force of truth. The HOA board in Birchwood Summit Estates believed they could pressure the Harringtons into submission with red tape intimidation and abuse of power. But they underestimated two critical things: the law and the resolve of a family that refused to be bullied. Through detailed planning, relentless documentation, and the wisdom of a father who knew the system better than the manipulators did, the Harringtons not only won back their access, but helped free their entire neighborhood from years of quiet oppression. Here's the takeaway: read the fine print. Ask questions, document everything, and never assume silence equals surrender. Whether you're dealing with an HOA, a local agency, or any institution trying to control your future through intimidation or procedural fog, remember that your voice matters. Your rights matter. And when you arm yourself with knowledge and the courage to speak up, even when you're the only one, at first you often discover that others have been waiting for someone to lead the way. To those who feel isolated in their own HOA battles or community struggles, take heart from this story. You're not alone. And the most powerful change doesn't always come from confrontation. It often starts with clarity, character, and a refusal to compromise your values. From U.S. Daily Story, thank you so much for listening and spending your time with us today. Your support helps us share stories that inspire, empower, and shine light on everyday injustice. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and comment your thoughts. We love hearing from you. And as always, remember, the fight for fairness starts small, but it echoes far. We'll see you in the next story.